We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.
So you think that you can tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder, what will it take for you to start opening your eyes?
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, July 10th, 2022. I'm Matt Dillahunty, your host. Joining me this week, Jmike. How are you, sir?
I am great. I'm excited.
You're muted. That's how you are.
Oh, my should be fine.
It's awesome. We got you in there.
You got me now?
Are you ready? I got
I'm
you.
good.
And we got
Okay,
our first call,
so-
by the way. We're just going to jump right in. John, pronouns are he, him, from California, says that arguments for God are absolutely worthless. I have my reasons. You can't use my reasons. You need your own. Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Matt. How are you doing? Hey, Jmike.
I'm all right.
How you doing, John?
Why on earth, if something were true, would you and I believe for different reasons if there were good reasons?
Why would we be? Because we all have individual experiences.
Yeah,
And,
but
not
no,
all
what I'm saying is that's not how sound reasoning works. If something is demonstrably true, then the evidence is available to all of us and applies to both of us. So like if smoking cigarettes increases your risk of cancer, the available evidence would be the reason to believe this. If you have a partner that loves you, the available evidence would be the reason to believe this. Why is God in a category where we can't use the same reasons?
Right, because it's not an evidence-based proposition.
So you're saying there is no
you
evidence for
believe-
God?
Well, it would be that as far as like the faith goes, right? The faith in God, it's something that's given by God. It's not.
No, I'm asking. I'm
that
asking you if it's in. You said it's not an evidence-based proposition. So, are you saying there is not
Correct.
evidence for God?
Well, I think there's evidence for a general revelation of God, certainly.
No.
Right.
Why? I don't know why this is so difficult, John. I'm asking you the easiest question. Are you saying
You're talking.
there is?
You're asking
Are
if there's
you
evidence
saying
for
there
theism.
is no
Yes.
evidence for God?
I'm saying yes, there is evidence for theism.
Okay.
Certainly.
If there is evidence for God, why is it that the evidence is not a justification for believing?
Well, I mean, believe in God and go to hell. I mean, so what is the
John,
what is the value of that?
John, please try to answer the question you're being asked rather than going off on an irrelevant sermon. If, in fact, there is evidence for God, why is it not the case that belief is then warranted by that evidence?
Belief in theism is warranted by the evidence.
You just said that it was not. You just said that it was a faith-based position that doesn't require evidence.
Yeah.
And if there's evidence, and then you said there is evidence,
Faith-based.
and then now you're saying that the evidence is sufficient to warrant belief. So what's your actual position here, John? Do you think there is sufficient
Right.
evidence? Hang on. Do you think there is sufficient evidence to warrant believing that a God exists?
Yes. I
Then
do.
present that
But-
evidence and
I'd
stop
like to
saying
specify
and
if I
stop
may.
saying that you have your reasons and I would have mine. If there's evidence and you
Yes,
think the
that's
evidence
what-
is, I'm still talking, John. If there is in fact evidence and you think the evidence is sufficient to warrant accepting the proposition that a God exists, present that evidence.
Yeah, I'm not interested in someone being a theist. What I was trying to
Okay,
tell
goodbye.
you Matt, before,
John keeps calling in every week and is just absolutely an epic failure on a regular basis. Today, John said that arguments are worthless, that it's a faith-based proposition that doesn't require evidence. And then when challenged, John thinks there is evidence and that the evidence is sufficient to warrant belief. And if that's the case, if there is evidence that is sufficient to warrant a belief, then faith has no purpose or use here. There's no reason or justification to believe something based on faith. Why would you do that if you have evidence? And John's not interested in justifying theists. So stop calling me, John. On that note, we will probably, for some of these others here, and I will let Mike decide. Don't forget about the full minute policy, Mike. When we get a caller in here, if you want to give them a minute, we've got a clock and everything, can pop it up. It'll show everybody what's going on. If you, people who are watching this, would like to participate beyond this, there's a number of different ways. We're happy that you're here in chat. You'll notice down below the chat, there's a donate link to donate to the ACA and all of its programmings and stuff. But there's also merchandise that you can get. If you don't want to do that, you can go to tiny.cc/merch-ACA and faith, the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have evidence. Coincidentally, that's the shirt for this month. And John, I will send you a free one of those shirts if you want. So if John calls back and wants to leave an address, I will personally buy the faith t-shirt for John if in fact John wants it. It's bizarre that science, the most consistently reliable path to understanding, relies exclusively in evidence that is repeatable and independently verifiable. I don't know why you wouldn't, why you'd ever not go for evidence like that. But for those of you who are looking, in addition to products and things, if you are the type of person who shops on Amazon.com, you can support the ACA at no cost to yourself. If you go to tiny.cc/AmazonSmileACA and designate the Atheist Community of Austin as your selected charity, and Amazon will donate a portion of your profits, or the profits from what you purchase, directly to the ACA. You can also become a member on YouTube for like 99 cents a month or more. That will get you custom emojis and get you out of any slow mode that we happen to invoke. You can also join at patreon.com/the Atheist Experience. And there are a number of unofficial forums that we like to advertise here. There's the Atheist Experience fan group and the Atheist Experience private fan group. That's tiny.cc/FBAXP and FBAXPPR. FBAXPPR. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Continuing on. We're doing really good. And there's the Atheist Community of Austin website. It's at www.atheist-community.org. It's been revamped. There's news and information up there. That's where we're going to have our position statements, any corrections or apologies that are up there, any information about what's going on with the ACA. You should be able to find it there, and it will continue to be improving. The revamp is done, but it's an ongoing process, is my understanding. And if you have feedback, questions, concerns, criticisms, whatever, you can email tv@atheist-community.org, and that goes to all of us on the show here as well. Speaking of science, we have a caller, or had a caller. There we go. Dean in California, pronouns are he, him, says science does not require methodological naturalism. So welcome, Dean.
How you doing, Dean?
Hello. Yeah. Science, that's my current assertion. Science does not require methodological naturalism. And my sort of understanding, is that methodological naturalism is the operational assumption by scientists that in order to perform science, you need to make it up. You need to assume metaphysical naturalism, right?
No.
No.
I was going to completely stop talking, Dean. I was going to completely just let Jmike go in on this. Before the call, I specifically had the caller go back and ask if you meant that science does not require philosophical naturalism or methodological naturalism. And you said methodological naturalism. And now in your description, what you just stated is that science must assume philosophical naturalism. And no, it doesn't. Neither of us believe that. So I'm going to guess that you just don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask, could you
okay.
So that way, because I want to make sure that I understand what your point is when you invoke these distinctions. What is the relevant distinction between methodological naturalism and philosophical naturalism? Or what is your understanding? That way we don't talk past each other.
That is not usually something that my own epistemology requires. I don't think the distinction is essential in my epistemology, but other.
Okay, so the answer is that you don't know the distinction, correct?
I know. I think I could give a rote description. The metaphysical the metaphysical naturalism is more of an ontological claim, while methodological naturalism is more of an operational way in order to conduct a certain process, or in order to do something productive,
Okay.
perform scientific research, you need to make certain assumptions about how the world works, and that's
Okay, and so when you called in initially saying that doesn't require naturalism, and we inquired for a
naturalism
distinction.
specifically.
We inquired for a distinction between the two, and then you weaved in from methodological naturalism into having to like assume ontological naturalism or philosophical naturalism, metaphysical naturalism, whichever term you want to use interchangeably. You went to that leap, but if you know the distinction, you would know that distinction is predicated on that type of that analysis being distinct, right? There are people that take philosophical naturalism to be true, who are like, you could call them like hard naturalists, right? That don't think that the supernatural has any say in any type of domain in ontology, right? Now, when we use if we're using it from like a methodological standpoint, where does that entail that person must be an ontological naturalist or a metaphysical naturalist? Where does that entail?
Well, it doesn't necessarily. The biggest question, it doesn't necessarily assume a certain ontology if you're conducting science, although I don't know. It just seems like that distinction is kind of if you assume a certain thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that you believe it, but I don't know to what sort of extent assuming means that you take personal credence into something. Well, if you're saying
can I go in the world and find worldly facts, discover how like the behaviors of things are, right, and describe how they might work, generate predictions, falsify them, verify them, things like that? Could I do that without having to say that could I still simultaneously say, yeah, I just don't know if there's something supernatural, or I don't know that there's a God? Could I still usefully use that method?
You could, yes. My point is that you could go out in the world and.
Okay, so I guess I'm not really seeing I'm not really seeing the problem you're saying, because is your claim that it doesn't require it? So I'm not really sure what you're even saying requires, because I don't know what your distinction is.
So if you're saying that you want to formulate hypothesis and make evidence, you don't need to have any notion of what. You don't need to have any sort of ontological vision or any opinion about naturalism. So therefore, naturalism is extraneous to science.
Look, I don't have to know that I'm not a brain in a vat right now to know that I can make predictions in the world. That's in my experience. That's not an ontological commitment that I have, right? I'm not committing to that, like necessarily physicalism is true or that I'm not being deceived, but I can still produce results within the experience that's produced to me through a method, right? I don't have to actually assume the ontology. Okay.
Precisely.
There has to be. So I guess I'm not really saying. I don't know if Matt wants to come in and add anything, but I'm not really seeing like what the point of your claim is. Like you're saying, it doesn't require. You're saying science doesn't require methodological naturalism. That's the claim.
In order to get systematic, in order to collect evidence in a systematic.
Yeah. So what's an alternative?
Way, one does not.
So what would be the alternative?
I think the more parsimonious position would be that you just need to find robust empirical relations between certain observable phenomena that we see, and construct scientific theories to fit the data to. And construct scientific theories to fit the data to the evidence, and it's like what you said, to test and to falsify those theories and to elaborate it based upon what the world based upon. Yeah.
Dean, when you're going through and you're listing the potential explanations for something, does science get to include non-natural potential explanations to consider?
The answer is strict is no, but largely
correct. And that means that science does in fact rely on methodological naturalism, because methodological naturalism is the methodological assumption that we don't get to appeal to the supernatural when looking for explanations. It doesn't mean that individual scientists are sitting around going, as I try to solve this problem and come up with a model, I need to stay within the bounds of methodological naturalism. No, It just means that we don't get to appeal to the supernatural. That's all methodological naturalism means, and it is the cornerstone of science. So your position is wrong by your own admission.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you have like a stereotypical view of a God that has infinite power and acts by fiat, obviously.
No, sir, Dean. Dean, stop talking, because you've now been backed into a corner where you proved yourself wrong. And when I pointed it out, what did you say? Well, if you're talking about a stereotypical God with blah, blah, blah. No, sir. You just went to something completely irrelevant. Whether you're talking about a stereotypical God, a non-stereotypical God, a God that's omnipotent, a God that's not, none of that has anything at all to do with the discussion that we just had about science and methodological naturalism. You have a defense mechanism in your brain so that when you are proven wrong, you spew forth something completely irrelevant as a distraction so that your brain doesn't have to face the fact that it's wrong. That's what you just did.
Wrong.
Yes. You proved yourself wrong.
I mean, I'm just... Okay. I mean, cool. I guess my sort of position is that there is no way to distinguish between natural and phenomenon and supernatural phenomenon. No, Dean. Dean,
you don't get to do that. You don't get to call in to talk about naturalism, and then when asked if science gets to appeal to the supernatural, you don't get to then, once you've been proven wrong and proven yourself wrong, get to claim that there's no difference between the natural and the supernatural, because now you sound absolutely asinine. Is there no difference between what's true and what's not true? Because that's the level that you're denying now when you say there's no difference between natural and supernatural.
I don't necessarily see that. I mean, I'm just...
Go study. You'll get to it eventually. Thanks. It's frustrating to prove yourself wrong like that. And our brains, not just Dean's, anybody's prone to doing this. You have to work hard to make sure you don't do this, which is, they just said something that short circuits. So I'm going to babble incoherently about something that I think sounds important, sounds significant, and isn't actually relevant at all. It is... it's a tough place to be in, especially if you're in public on TV. And it's one of those things I wish all of us need to work better to memorize or to recognize, which is that once you've made a public profession of here's what I believe, the likelihood that you're going to also publicly admit that you have defeated your own argument or that you were wrong is pretty low, because now you have an investment. There's an extra sort of embarrassment.
Which is strange, because it's like, if you think about the alternative, what ends up happening when you realize that, wow, okay, I believe this thing. I had something that I presume justified it. I found out that it doesn't justify it. And then now I change my position to a more defensible position. Like, that's a really good thing. That's something to like celebrate about, in my opinion. I mean, that's how anybody comes to a position where they feel more confident about talking about said position, because they've updated their beliefs to one that's more defensible and easier for them to defend, because they're not pulling it out of their ass live on a show.
Yeah. On that note, if you're the type of person who would like to engage in sort of debates, there's an atheist versus theist debate group that we like to promote as well. That's at china.cc/AXP fan debates. And it's a great place to go to work through this stuff, because if you're about to call in and say something like there's no difference between the natural and the supernatural, that's something you could bring into one of the debate groups there and see if people have easy answers. Because I did something the other day. I was sitting around, and I don't even remember what it was, so I'm not going to give details, but I was sitting around contemplating something that had a very easy answer that was obvious, that I kind of already knew, and yet I made the problem more complicated than it needed to be. I was sitting there and I was like, oh, but it could be this and this and this. And one thing led to another, until I was a mile away from the actual subject. Why? Because thinking is fun. For some people, I get it. Thinking's not fun. Problem solving is not that fun. But for me, thinking is fun. And then when I realized that the answer was incredibly simple and had been staring me in the face, I was like, you dumbass. I'm harder on myself than I'm on anybody. But we're all going to make those mistakes. In addition, I know that some of you tuned in and just like stay tuned in all day long because you started with Talk Heathen earlier in the day and you saw Johnny Angel and you saw Dan on there and taking calls. But in between Talk Heathen and Atheist Experience, there's also the flagship program of the ACA, the nonprofits.
Oh, it
Sundays
makes me
at
so
3 when you
happy to
host a
hear
new
that come
segment.
out of your mouth, Matt.
It's amazing. I'm contractually obligated by like Johnny has to pay me $20 every time I say flagship.
We joke around. We say the
but-
flagship show of the Atheist Experience Network, just to make it that much more confusing for people.
Oh, that's right. Atheist Experience Network. Speaking of the Atheist Experience Network, I know that some of you, everybody here watching is at least familiar with the Atheist Experience, and I just mentioned Nonprofits and Talk Heathen, but there are other shows as well. And if you haven't been keeping up, you can go to tiny.cc/AEN podcasts, plural. That is your one-stop shop for all of our shows as audio-only podcasts, so that, I mean, you don't even have to look at me. You could just listen. And you could like mute when I talk and just listen to other people talk if you want to. So if you like the Atheist Experience and you aren't familiar with the other shows, please check that out, give them a listen. And the whole reason that site exists and has clips and audio podcasts when we're sitting here doing video and everything else is the same reason that I'm able to sit here with Mike today and talk to you and take calls. And that is that we have the coolest, baddest ass crew in the world, in the whole world. Those are some of them people. Some of them are screening calls. Some of them are fading in and out of reality. Evidently that top left corner just went right, boom.
Or waking
I
up
don't know
from
what
a
happened.
cat nap.
And in addition to the people that you saw, there's a bunch of people that you did not see. I know you saw the Lord of Levels reaching over to the cat, but there's people over there in chat who are moderating. There's people taking notes and timestamps so that you can get clips, so that you don't have to watch a whole 90-minute episode to find what you're looking for. You may be able to find, hey, can I search for caller suggests naturalism and supernaturalism aren't different? Yes, you may actually be able to search for that and find the call. All right, Mike, you ready to move on?
Let's do it.
All right. We have questioning theist, pronouns are he, him in Washington, who says, I don't think atheists use critical thinking. And if I can't agree with you on little things, how can I agree with you on big things? Wow, that's fun. Welcome, questioning.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good Sunday, so overall good.
Cool. What do you got?
Okay, sure. So where I agree with you guys is on not agree exactly, but where I think you guys are logically sound is on if there may be a God or not. I've heard your gumball analogy, burden of proof for evidence, all these arguments. I think you may be right on this, but the thing is, for example, how do I know if I'm judging a group for respect with credibility, don't I need to agree with their other things?
No. It's possible for me to be right on 9 things and wrong on the 10th thing. Each individual position requires its own argument supported by evidence.
That is fair, but I'd say let's say you're in a practical situation, wouldn't you? Let's say someone made 9 incorrect statements, but 1 correct statement, right? How even you would use the 9 incorrect statements he made to judge his credibility, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but if a lawyer gets you all, let's say you're on trial and the lawyer lost the last couple cases or something, it has nothing to do with the fact that they have good evidence for their client in this case. They're just not related. I don't really see the point.
I mean, if you were to assess, I think I get what you're saying. Here's somebody who made 10 statements and 9 of them were wrong. Would we consider them a particularly good thinker? No. But the fact that you know that 9 of them were wrong and 1 of them is true suggests that you're a good thinker, and so you'll be able to analyze which of those is correct. But similarly, if somebody had 9 statements right, you don't know whether or not the 10th one is right because they're each independent. This is why, there's a line about using eyewitnesses. Suddenly, the character of the person is somehow relevant to their testimony. It's not. You're not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not wrong about 9 out of 10 things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would find the things, for example, if you point out something that we disagree about, then we may be able, we seem to disagree about a
Sure,
God,
can I
even
point
though
something?
you think that we're probably right.
Okay.
What do we disagree about that makes you question our ability to think critically?
No, definitely. Not you, but it's a little personal to you guys. So it's not like an attack. I promise you. I'm not trying to do this like on purpose. But is it okay if I bring it up? I do not feel any offense to this.
Hang on, I'm going to type something down on my screen here.
Sure, no
Go
worries.
ahead.
It's not. This is okay. So, for example, when the Atheist Experience, I believe, like kind of broke up and stuff, right? Like on the transgender sport issue, right? I'm pro transgender, whatever, and I'm pro LGBT. I don't have any problems with this. But the thing is, on the sports thing, it's almost like I don't think you. I feel like the members who left because of that were not using critical thinking on that idea, but they could use critical thinking on God. For example, it's not like it's kind of common sense that someone's going to be tolerable. No.
Hey, excuse me.
Sure.
So
Yes.
the people who left, you probably don't even know the reasons that they left or what their issues were.
Mm-hmm.
But if your disagreement
Sure.
is about what role trans people should play in sports,
Mm-hmm.
I would highly recommend that you go. I can actually recommend videos for you offline, but we're not going to sit here and rehash that issue.
Okay. Okay, so are you saying bring another example or
I guess I'm just, this is the Atheist Experience. I thought we were going to talk about God stuff.
Sure, but I mean my thing is on credibility, right? So if I cannot agree with you on
No. We've already addressed that. You could think I'm wrong about 20. You could think I'm wrong about 20 things, and it doesn't matter as to whether or not I'm credible on the God thing. And the fact that you don't agree with me, the fact that you don't agree with me doesn't mean that I'm wrong on those other things.
Yeah, and it's really strange because it's like it's a notion at which you take to be credible. I mean, look at like flat earthers; they don't find like educational authorities to be very credible, yet they're just wrong, right? The independent evidence, they're just wrong. So you would look at the actual evidence in question, not like the person who presents the evidence, right? Because that has nothing to do with what the actual analysis of the evidence is, right?
But that is fair, and I agree with you. You have to look at the specific argument, and like I said in the beginning, right? I think your argument is fundamentally sound when you're saying the gumball machine and everything, at least based on an evidence point of view, right? But it's the credibility thing. It's like how, okay, let's say I was
know what that means.
Talking to a.
I think he's saying that the analogies works, but I'm confused too, because like we get the gumball analogy, right? The fact that like I might not think it's the thing. You're good.
We don't make arguments against the existence of God. People try to demonstrate the truth that a God exists, and they repeatedly fail, and we're pointing that out. But to the extent that I argue against the existence of God, it may be the case that if my argument is fundamentally identical, or my objection to a theistic argument is fundamentally identical to another atheist who disagrees with me on trans women in sports, isn't that enough to say that my position on trans women in sports is irrelevant to the God question?
I agree with you, but okay, can I?
Cool. No. You don't get to. I agree with you, but you either agree or you don't.
Okay, I agree. Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Okay, do you agree? Do you think all disciplines, like let's say you got disciplines, gender studies, theology, and evolutionary biology, do you think all of these are created equal?
No.
No, it's because let's say you got an evolutionary biologist, their track record is far more credible than a gender studies, if that's more credible than even maybe theology or something, right?
No.
So I think most people would. Okay.
Stop. An expert on. So there are hard sciences and there are soft sciences. That has nothing to do with individual credibility. Please stop with individual credibility. It's irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the argument. It doesn't matter if an AI came up with it, Jmike came up with it, I came up with it, Dawkins came up with it, your mom came up with it, or the guy at the end of the street came up with it. Credibility is irrelevant to an argument.
In fact,
the argument is either
listen to the show,
valid in structure.
In fact, if you listen to the show, you'll hear like plenty of the hosts preach all the time. Like even especially if a theist calls and they go, you know what, you might be right on that. One of the first responses, at least the response that I will give, is don't just take my word for it, right? Don't just be like, okay, you sounded smart, or you said something that makes sense, so therefore it's true. Don't take my credibility on how I heard it. Go look at the information, the evidence yourself, right? So it's not, this is like a point that we make towards other people once they go, you know what, I agree with your point. It's like, okay, do more, right? Make sure that what I'm telling you is not just me like wooing you over, right? Go look at the evidence. So it's consistent across the board that the credibility of some person is irrelevant, because it's the content of what they're saying is what we're analyzing, right? We're not analyzing the character, we're analyzing the content of what's being discussed.
If a
No, I
flat
agree,
earther,
but I would say, for example,
no, you can't.
none
There
of
you go
us
again.
physics, right?
No, I give up. There you go again. I agree, but if a flat earther says that the sky is blue, they're not fucking wrong. Their credibility is irrelevant.
Yes, correct.
And by the way,
agree with you on this issue.
when I typed in, when I predicted what you were going to do, when I predicted what you were going to object to, I wrote down trans issues on my notepad here. You believe me?
Sure, I believe you, but
yes, because it's the single most predictable thing that dude bros call in to bitch about is how can you be reasonable about all these other things, but not about trans issues? Why do you believe in something, blah, blah, blah. I'm happy to talk about trans rights issues in other contexts, but if you're a theist and you're calling in to question your theism, let's focus on that and not on anybody's character, because nobody's character is relevant to this.
Definitely. I'm not going to pick on anyone's character. My question was, I've heard you sometimes say, let's say you'll argue with a theist, right? And you will say something, you'll argue on physics, and you'll be like, I do not understand the physics, but this is what the physicists say, right? How do you know the physicists are right? It's because they're credible, right? Wouldn't you say so? Because they have authority on that field. For example, Stephen Hawking.
No. So, wow, this is mind-numbing. It's not because they're credible, and I certainly don't go ask physicists what their position is on sports, because their credibility in an area like sports is irrelevant. You said you weren't going to talk about credibility and character, and you went right back and did it again. Physicists are not believed. Physicists are not believed because of their character or their qualifications or their credentials or how many times you can find they're right on other subjects. It is the evidence supporting the argument that is all that is relevant to the conclusions, period. You are seeking a popularity argument in order to believe something or not. And that is fallacious.
Yeah, because there's a difference between pointing to like a consensus of physicists when we're pointing to that, what's being discussed among, what's being analyzed or peer reviewed amongst that is the actual evidence, right? The predictions that they generate. And so this is not like an issue of like the amount of people, as opposed to the actual peer review process that's involved with these experts that are constantly reviewing the information, right? That's a distinction from just people think it's true.
Right. You are implicitly engaged in the fallacious argument from authority, only you're doing it with regard to their credibility in other areas. Is it more likely that someone who's spent 20 years studying biology is going to be correct more often than someone who's never studied biology? Yes, but that doesn't mean that any given statement from either of them is true or not true. And it doesn't mean that their overall credibility in any way impacts whether an individual statement is true or not true. Does that make sense?
No, that makes different sense. Okay, I'll probably call them back next week, and I'll think about this, and I think it was a good discussion. I think it's good.
Hey, DY, yeah. Oh, good job, Cookies. That was fun. All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I guess, is it? Well, I don't know. Oh, that's T for theist and then questioning theist. So didn't want to give a name, but cool. All right. Here's a question. Brandon in Washington, pronouns are he, him, wants to know if it's better to have faith in something regardless of whether it's true. So do you have like an example, Brandon?
I think I do, hopefully. By the way, it's an honor to speak to you. I've watched all your debates, etc. Staunch atheist here. I was just talking about or thinking about the conscious as opposed to the subconscious. And when we pass away, how long that time is since I think scientists or at least have a theory that time doesn't exist in our subconscious. Maybe not, as far as life flashing before our eyes. And whatever you believe in, no God involved, you're judging yourself based on what you believe in, and then you're condemning yourself to that certain disposition, I guess. And I'm wondering if it's okay to shake the belief in, like, my parents who are staunch Christians or any religion, and have them confused. I mean, if they happen to pass away with their full mental capacity, as opposed to like someone who falls off a building and their brains are ruined. You know what I mean? When someone passes away and all of the neurons fire at once, and there's not necessarily time in our subconscious, or the idea that we can break the conscious to subconscious barrier. I guess
I'm a little confused, Brandon. I'm kind of confused.
I'm
Maybe
way confused.
Can you help me out? Like, what's the main concern that you could like phrase in a question or a statement or something we could run with?
Okay, I guess the main concern was whether it's real or not, finding peace at death. I know that sounds like a fairy tale. I'm not sure how to describe it.
You mean for the person that dies, or for
yes,
well, you'd be dead presumably. So I don't know that there'd be relevant form of peace.
Yeah, if in fact, brain function and conceptualization and agency all end at death, how could it possibly be the case that one has found peace? How can you find anything when you're dead?
I guess depending. I mean, it's still a theory. Well, all science is a theory, but your neurons all. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought a theory is where science ends until another one is proven.
No,
maybe I'm
not. All of science is the process by which we create models and theories that describe the world.
Yes.
Not everything within science is a theory, but even those, you said earlier, science has a theory that time doesn't exist for the subconscious. I'm not aware that any such theory exists. Maybe hypotheses and hypothetical ideas, but in any case, all the evidence points to when I'm dead, my subconscious is dead as well. So how could I possibly find peace if there's no me and no consciousness left to find anything?
I guess because at the moment of death would be the same as the moment starting a dream. Dreams can last longer or shorter.
No.
And depending on, did you say no? I'm sorry.
Wow, this is all wrong. There is no moment of death.
Okay.
Death is a process. And so where did you get this idea that at the moment of the death, it's the same as starting a dream? And by the way, what makes you think a dream is peaceful? You're like stacking one thing on top of another on top of another. And the question I asked is, if consciousness ends, that means there's nothing left to find anything. You're basically, it'd be like, I've got a magnifying glass and I can use it to find something small. But if I don't have a magnifying glass anymore, I'm not going to find those things that required a magnifying glass. And so if finding peace requires a functioning mind, then I can't possibly find peace or anything else if my mind is no longer functioning.
Okay, so I completely I think I understand what you're saying. And I guess where I was coming at from that was Matthew Alpert's The God Part of the Brain, who was an atheist who talks about how we use that as a fight or flight mechanism from early ages on. And then from just some Michio Kaku podcast that I've read about
so you're listening to lunatic.
Brain, I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm poking fun at Michio Kaku. Anyway.
The idea is that when we die, that our neurons all sort of fire off at once. I don't want to get into like psychedelics or any BS like that, but the subconscious state or a dream or whatnot when we pass away could last a very long time, I think. Would you agree with that, or is that just a no?
like a straight up no. Because if it is, I guess the conversation's over. I just had it was
I mean, you're like
a worry of
it's
mine.
well, it's
So, like,
you're
if
like
I'm in
assuming
bed and
you're
I
oh, hold on, Brandon. If I'm hearing you right, you're assuming you're assuming a properly functioning brain in the case of the dream, where that's just like not analogous in the case we talk about with death, because we're talking about like cell death, right? There are no neurons firing, right? Or at least there's the process of that ceasing. And so I'm not really seeing like why that would be analogous, because you're taking for granted a functioning brain in one case. So the same type of property in the other case isn't analogous.
It's almost like you're saying, hey, if I stop experiencing, wouldn't that be a great experience that lasts a long time? No. If you stop experiencing, you are done experiencing.
So if I quit experiencing every night we close our eyes and just decide to go unconscious for 3 days a day.
You don't stop. No. You do not stop experiencing. Okay. Have you ever set an alarm clock? Has anybody ever woken you up?
Yes.
Then you don't stop experiencing when you go to sleep. Death is not like sleep. If you stop experiencing, you stop experiencing.
And there's not a moment in between stop experiencing and the moment
your brain is still functioning,
where all of the brain is still functioning, and you don't go back into your vessel for an alarm.
Brandon, so I'm reading a book at the moment, and it talks about how during sleep, which, you know, I have to look more into this because I'm not the resident Shannon Q, so my ignorance creeps in pretty quick. But from what I've gathered, sleep is when we sleep, there's a lot going on. I mean, that's why what helps aid in memory and a lot of things that you learn throughout the day. And I've woken up catching myself talking about something that I've looked up or that I was looking up that day, right? Well, almost feeling like I've caught myself storing that type of information in my head. So I just don't see the analog between the two cases, because, I mean, we can show, like, you know, someone going through REM sleep or what the brain is doing, but then we could do the same type of like fMRI on just a dead person or someone going through that, and you're just not seeing anything analogous there. In fact, you're seeing the cessation of that type of a process. So it seems like trivial to me.
Okay, I read a few studies, I don't have them in front of me, about upon the moment of death, the brain neurons lighting up, essentially from...
There is no such thing as a moment of death.
Say that again? I'm so sorry.
There is no such thing as a moment of death.
Okay, so it's just a slow decay, and then the brain completely like shuts down if you turn the computer off. You're saying.
Well, I don't know. I haven't experienced it, but it's not the same in every circumstance. Some deaths are longer than others. If what you're saying is, from the point in time where I'm definitely dying but not yet dead, is it possible for me to achieve peace before I stop being able to experience anything? I don't know. I don't know how anybody knows. I don't even know what it means to say achieve peace. And by the way, even if you could achieve peace
is the wrong term.
And even if you could achieve peace, I don't know that there's any guarantee that that would be the thing that you achieve. And what difference does it make if you're dead a second later?
That's what I was getting to. And achieve peace, I apologize, was not the right term. All I meant was that the few seconds before you die, the few seconds before you die could last a very, very long time in your subconscious.
Okay.
Normally,
now what you're asking, now what you're asking is, when my brain is dying, is it possible for me to perceive a virtual eternity of peace in that instant before death? Nobody fucking knows.
Exactly. No matter what religion you have, and is it bad for me to stir the apple cart of someone who has a staunch belief? And even if they're not, pontificating towards some other assholes, and they're not, as long as they're not like out there preaching and doing harm to the world, is me changing their beliefs in their subconscious a bad thing?
No. But you have no business
Okay.
changing their beliefs in their subconscious. They have a belief that they can't demonstrate, and which also, by the way, is unfalsifiable. So do you think you can disprove their belief that eternity is going to happen before they die?
As far as, because I come from a
No, you
family
can't.
that's
It's an
completely denied.
unfalsifiable proposition. They are mistaken to believe it without sufficient evidence, and you are mistaken to think you can falsify the unfalsifiable.
Gotcha, but in our subconscious, there's
Gotcha,
the
but-
conscious subconscious barrier. I'm beating on this drum too hard, but the fact that we can, I don't know how you describe it. There's a test that you can do where you can walk around looking for quarters for a week, and then if you stop looking for quarters for a week, your subconscious still picks up on that. If they have a belief so strong that it hits their subconscious, when they pass away, am I screwing up that quarter cart, we can call it, or whatever, by showing them the reasons they're wrong?
I'm not really sure I understand.
If they're wrong, there's no problem with showing them why they're wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not
my
really sure
question
what's
is,
wrong with
how are you going
presenting.
to show them?
Okay. It was just a question, and yeah, I appreciate your answer. And yeah, it's not a problem that I have within myself. It's a problem I have with trying to explain to other people.
Look, Brandon. This is the easiest way that I could.
In any way, shape,
This
or
is the
form.
easiest. This is the easy way I could put it. One, I don't. Yeah, I mean, depending on the conception of their God. I mean, if they just tell you what they believe and there's like contradictory properties or something, then sure, you could show them why that's in some like logical tension or something. But for most cases, like people aren't going to offer up all that type of stuff, and you're going to claim that you can like falsify something that's presumably not falsifiable. But if you're worried about like having the conversation with the person and convincing them, look, the way that I always take these conversations is like there's a line in the sand and you can cross over the line to have these conversations, because I can't force you, right? And if you believe something, I don't know that you owe, some random atheist or some person an explanation for your beliefs if you just want to keep that to yourself, right? I obviously want to have the conversation
and vice
with
versa,
people.
right?
Yeah, I obviously want to have the conversation. I can't grab them by the shirt and force them to have a conversation with me. What you can do is you can analyze and have these conversations with people that are over the line, right? That have crossed that line, and they're like, I'm willing to have the conversation. Some cases you'll see that they want to put one foot over the line, right? And say, well, I have my faith and you have this. But I mean, if you're worried, if somebody's willing to defend their beliefs, like I wouldn't be concerned about whether or not you change their mind, because if they agree, if they come to change their mind on the position, like many people who are atheists who are even hosts on shows like this, all you're going to end up doing is changing their mind to a more defensible position. And I've never heard someone go, wow, I'm like really bummed out that I'm now an atheist. It was way better believing in all this stuff that I think is false now. Right? And I just don't know you're going to get that type of response. So it just seems like if the person's willing to have the conversation,
you don't change people's mind.
That was sort of the response that I had when I was into either a what do you call it, a transcendental meditation, or actually keeping a dream journal, etc., and realizing how long they were. And then I was, in my head, I was like, well, if I don't believe in anything, then where does my subconscious go? I guess was my main, not question, but my question for other people, and whether I should mess with their brain by giving my example.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I
you seem to think that you have more influence over the world than you do. You don't change people's minds, and you're not responsible for other people changing their minds unless you're engaged in some sort of fucking corrupt indoctrination. But if you just convince somebody that they don't have good reason for something, congratulations, you were just being honest. But don't sit around fretting over the damage you're going to do with the world with your big brained ideas when it takes 11 minutes to sort out, hey, is it possible for people to experience an eternity in the last moments prior to death?
Gotcha.
Nobody knows.
And what do you think about the last moments of eternity before death? I guess is my last question. And I know it's probably been a bore for you, but you guys have helped me a lot. I appreciate it.
I'm glad it's helpful. But yeah, with regard to what do I think? I have no idea.
Okay.
And I don't
yeah,
clearly
what the brain does
Clearly, that's impossible.
To die without.
No. It's impossible to experience an eternity before death because an eternity doesn't end. And that, by definition,
yes, I don't mean an eternity. I mean a very long time is all.
Well,
yeah, there's totally there's not an eternity. But thank you.
I feel like a near eternity on some of these calls.
Thank you. Probably mine too.
No, not yours. Yours wasn't anywhere near an eternity. That was the good thing. I got to make it a joke at your expense without it actually being at your expense. There are some calls that do seem to take a long time, but not quite eternity. Hey, if you've been sitting around watching this program and it feels like it's occupied so much of your time in a single call that you haven't been able to catch up on all of the other shows that the atheist community of Austin produces here at the Atheist Experience Network, we did you a solid. Check this out.
Hell, I mean, I've been having sex with myself for like 25 years, and I still am discovering new things. I'm still like weirding myself out. I'm still surprising myself. After all these years, it's still special.
He's a PhD,
yeah,
who believes the Nephilim of the Bible. The ancient giants described in the Bible built the pyramids.
Yep,
you go to school for like 8 years, and you're like, yeah, man, it was giants.
I know.
I live in a blue state, so people will say, oh, don't worry, your uterus is fine, your rights are fine. But I genuinely give no flying about that when millions of women in over 13 states so far have essentially lost their entire bodily autonomy.
There is truly an afterlife where myself and Ben will go and party, and I will no longer have these rashes that he refuses to look at. If that's the case, what the am I waiting for?
We use inductive reasoning in science because deductive reasoning is rife with fallacies and bias. We use inductive reasoning because that way we look at what the evidence says and draw a conclusion from it rather than trying to rule out conclusions based on the only things that we can possibly think of.
And we're back, and we've got Serge in Australia. Pronouns are he, him, wants to know, why are atheists asking for evidence, and why do theists want to prove anything? Belief doesn't require evidence. Welcome, Serge. How are you? Or is it Sergey?
Good. How are you guys?
Is it Sergey and I did it wrong?
Serge.
Serge, good.
No, it's Serge.
You're absolutely right, Serge, that beliefs don't require evidence, but warranted beliefs do. And I would like for my beliefs to be warranted. And that's why I ask for evidence. And rational, reasonable people want warranted beliefs. And so that's why theists who think that their God belief is warranted try to provide evidence. Does that answer your question?
It actually does. But what's the difference between those two beliefs, warranted and non-warranted?
Well, warranted beliefs are less likely to be wrong, aren't they?
Yeah, but warranted by what?
Warranted by the evidence. Like if you believe that there's if we're getting ready to cross the street and you believe that there's no bus coming towards us, and I believe that there is a bus coming towards us, isn't the actual evidence the thing that determines which of us has a warranted belief? And isn't that important?
It is. I have a similar example. If I was to bet on a fixed game, am I still betting?
Yes, you're still betting. That doesn't necessarily mean you are gambling to the same extent that you would be gambling were the game not fixed.
Exactly. So that's actually my point, because for me, belief with evidence stops being a belief. It's knowledge. It's a fact.
No, knowledge is a subset of belief. It doesn't stop being a belief. All of the things you know, you still believe them.
Yeah, you have to have Well, hold on, Serge. You have to have the belief, right? If it's like a component of that, you're going to have that. Like, think about the difference. Like, if I just believe it's raining outside, what I'm saying is I have a commitment towards the proposition that it's raining outside, right? The proposition is that it's raining outside, and I have a commitment. My commitment is that I think it's true. What Matt's saying is that it's not just merely the fact that I have this commitment to a proposition. It's that there's something doing the justifying, right? Something that presumably warrants why I have the belief, right? So there's a symmetry there, right? They're not the same thing.
This is why on the show, this is why we ask, what do you believe in why? And why is the important part, because there's a billion people on the planet who believe in some sort of God, but they don't all believe for the same reasons. And the why behind that belief is what's important, because if their reasons for believing are fallacious, if it's not good evidence, if it's not sufficient, then that means they have an unwarranted belief. But if in fact they have a warranted belief, I would like to share that. I want to believe things. I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And that's why it matters why you're convinced of something.
And the methodology, because I can easily construct like that I had a bad day today, and like, you know, or let's say I have a string of bad days, and I could cite evidence that's evidence for like a good day fairy or something that's just like giving me good days, right? I can construct that type of evidence pretty easily, right? It's pretty easy to construct that. But if I don't generate some prediction in the future that I can like verify or I could even falsify, then like seemingly giving that type of a reason for the belief is distinct from just having the belief, or having the belief because like I have a hunch or like something that I might think justifies it. Like if I'm actually applying something that justifies it, and it's not just the belief, those are clearly two different types of situations, right?
Does that answer your question?
Well, but does that mean, yes, it does, but does having a reason to believe something needs to be an evidence for it?
If you're using a reason to justify X, presumably you're attempting to justify it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
I mean, I would just, in your daily life, if you're making decisions about what you find believable, isn't it always for you the result of the available evidence for the proposition?
For me, it is, but if I can make a distinction between something I believe not based on proof, just because I want to, based on faith, even though I'm not a believer anymore. But I just find it weird that as an atheist, I would ask for proof for something that cannot be proved, or actually a theist asking for proof.
Now we're to the
you need proof for.
You just said that you find it weird that you would ask for evidence for something that can't be proved. How do you know it can't be proved?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, because we cannot provide any evidence for it. There you go.
No. That is the fact that you may not have good enough evidence for it now does not mean that there isn't good enough evidence that you just don't have. Doesn't mean that there won't be in the future. You do not know that this cannot be demonstrated. And that is your problem. You're not being skeptical. You're being cynical. You have reached the conclusion that God cannot be demonstrated. And once you've reached that conclusion, asking for evidence would seem ridiculous. If you think that there's no way to prove something, asking for evidence would be ridiculous. But you're wrong, because you have no way of demonstrating that it can't be proven. And I don't either. I don't think it's likely. But the reason I keep asking for evidence is because there are people out there who believe it and who believe they have evidence, and they believe that it can and has been demonstrated. Until that changes, we got to ask for evidence.
That was actually a good point. I wasn't thinking that it could be just cynical.
Yeah.
That's right.
No worries. Thanks, Serge.
Okay. That's awesome question. Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having my call. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Have a good, day, evidently. Oh, man. We're cranking it out. Did you see one that you were itching to get to? I did.
Ooh.
And until you come up with another one, I want to
you go.
Jonah.
Yeah, you go ahead. I'll give it a good look over and make sure.
Jonah in Tennessee, pronouns are he, him, wants to know if we think the show's impacted theist communities in negative ways. Like what, Jonah?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So basically, I'll just bring up a name of a negative person. Like, do you guys recognize Darth Dawkins?
I've heard the name, yeah. I believe he may have called in the past. I know he's got his little acolytes he'll send around.
He refuses to talk to me. So, yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. So yeah, people like that. Do you think that the show's existence has like perpetuated people like that coming in and basically spreading their poison, so to speak, throughout?
Do you think that Darth Dawkins and other evangelicals would not be spreading their poison if we weren't here?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I mean,
they literally have a verse that commands them, a couple verses that command them to do it. So no, I don't think I have encouraged. Yeah. So my thing is,
I'm not necessarily. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know for a fact that we have convinced some theists to stop believing. I have no problem with the notion that some theists may listen to this and, man, they might amp up their proselytizing. They could be on fire with the Holy Spirit going out to witness, and I don't give a fuck because I'm telling the truth and I'm challenging their beliefs. And if that motivates them to try to spread it more, cool. That's job security for me, even though I don't get paid for this, but it's still job security in the sense that there's always going to be a rationality to counter.
Okay. Well, you guys definitely helped me. I wasn't saying that you guys have made a bad impact on people.
It's a legit question. It's the reason I saw your question before the show started, and I was like, I definitely want to make sure we take that one, because what if it did turn out, Mike, that we sit here and we debunk, nonsense claims or point out fallacies and other things, and what if it just turns out to strengthen and make them more extreme, maybe? It's still one of those things where, like, truth is always a defense to libel in my head.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I just, how would you go about combating those people other than what we're already doing?
Depends on what you
I would
mean
do what I'm doing.
specifically. If you're talking about evangelicals or
like
presups or what, depends, because there's different ways that they go about. It depends on what you mean in virtue of like what they want to push against people, just arguments. Specifically, I'm not really sure what you mean.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is kind of a dumb question. I mean,
It's not a dumb question.
What else can we do?
It's not a dumb question. It's just specifically, I mean, because
it's a good question.
Yeah, it's like if you there's different ways that I guess I could cash that out in terms of like what could we do in virtue of like talking about just the conversation, or what type of responses or objection should I consider to these talking points, or like what can we do in our communities, or actually by legislation or lobbying or things like that. There's more than one thing to consider in this umbrella of religion.
I'll give you an example, Jonah. I just did a video. Jimmy Snow and I did a video responding to Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson's a whiny little shit who's
great video,
not particularly impressive. And it was basically he got suspended from Twitter and decided to post a multi-camera slick shot whiny thing where he repeatedly misgendered and dead named Elliot Page. And one of the things that he did was he talked about how Elliot, being this famous actor, is probably influencing hundreds or thousands of young girls to become trans. And part of what we pointed out, that's not how any of this works. People, let's just, because he views it as a fad and he thinks that Elliot is a woman and all this other stuff. It's just terrible. But even if Elliot Page had inspired a bunch of non-trans kids to think they're trans for a period of time, it's irrelevant, because Elliot Page has every right to their identity, to their life, to their pronouns, to their name, to absolutely everything else. And if it impacts somebody else's life, that doesn't invalidate their life, because that part is just true. Similarly, if somebody winds up incredibly depressed because we've managed to convince them there isn't a God, that would be damage that you could point back and say, not you, well, I mean, you could, but I'm not saying you're doing that. You could point back and say, hey, this is what damage you guys are doing. And my response to that would be, no, The damage was done by the religion.
Yep.
The damage was done by putting ideas in people's heads that without the religion, they are worthless, that without the religion, they are of less value. And so when the religion goes away, it wasn't me or Jmike that put those ideas about their value in their head, because we are in agreement that we're all humans and have whatever value humans have universally, to whatever extent we have a value. So complaining that Elliot may be doing this, oh, there could be harm, is kind of like your question. It's a legit question, but it's not so much that we need to find out, hey, is it true that there's harm being done, or where does the actual harm lay? Because I would argue that to whatever extent Elliot might be inspiring trans kids, it's because they didn't know about options before, because of people like Jordan Peterson denying the reality of people's gender identity. But that's just me. And a bunch of people.
So I definitely agree. And I don't want to waste your guys' time. I know you get theist callers that you need to get to because they need convincing. But do you, to redirect the question, do you think it might have increased the extremism, or do you think that was just a trend that the religion has been on in general, especially in the United States?
Oh, I think that's a trend, and irrationality is a big part of that trend.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. I don't want to waste any more of your time. Thank you so much for letting me talk.
Yeah, thanks for calling. I think I got one, man.
All right. Do you? Who you want?
There's a lot of theists. Let's go to Mike, and you want me to hit talk? Oh yeah, Mike in Washington. Yeah, let's go to Mike. Pronouns are he, him. In Washington, have naturalists proven a natural origin of life? There's a lot to discuss there. Yeah, what do you take? Do you take that science is proving things?
Yeah, they prove planes fly, right?
So you're saying when we construct a theory or a model, we're saying that that's like a proof and not like a working model that can be falsified given new evidence?
No, I'm just asking. I asked the question. Have you guys?
No, I just don't like the word proof. I don't like using the word prove or proof when we're talking about like theories and science.
Demonstrate then? Demonstrate it?
Sure.
Demonstrate the process?
Yeah, so abiogenesis has like we have a lot of different theories. I'm not like, so I'm talking to someone like Forrest is probably definitely better on that because I don't have any expertise in this field. But yeah, we have hypotheses that we actually are generating we're generating predictions with, say, like RNA on clay, right, is one that you could look into where the
I've looked into this. I looked into this.
Oh, hold on.
My question is, have you demonstrated it?
Yeah, so there is evidence to actually support any of these theories as opposed to the thesis that's been offered up beyond that. So yeah, there is reason to think that this is at least justified given actual predictions, right? Which is the evidence I'm looking for, not just like a just so story about origins.
So the most basically thing, like say amino acids, the 20 amino acids, what constitute proteins, which is the major portion, besides water, is 50% of all cells. And there's these 4 chemical elements. And how come you guys can't induce all 20 of those amino acids into a pile sufficient to make at least one protein?
Okay, because you're not okay. Because look, you're just not understanding what it means for, like, in the case of when you're talking about like some type of, like, let's say like amino acids or something, you're not looking at precursors of things that are a lot more simple, right? You're talking about like things right now.
Well, demonstrate them then.
Yeah, you're saying, look, to me, it just shows like I don't have very much expertise in this. I don't have any expertise in this, but this is like something that you could look up pretty quickly to find out that when we're talking about it, like the interactions of amino acids, they're happening in trillions of places, right? Like there's trillions of different interactions happening in trillions of different places at once. But it's not just like amino current like the analysis we have today, right? We're talking about like simple precursors, right? So it's you're kind of making a category error in terms of how you're analyzing this.
Is it right? That's what you're saying.
I have a question for clarity, Mike, because the call screening note said you were asking the question, have naturalists proven a natural origin of life? And my question is, has anybody proven any origin of life?
Well, it's pretty much proven that there isn't a natural origin of life.
No, sir. No, sir. Mike, that's not what I asked. Mike, that's not what I asked.
No, let me answer this way.
I tell you what, let me put your ass on mute and we can address the question that I'm asking. And the question that I asked is, has anybody proven an origin of life? That's all I asked. And you replied that natural has been disproven, and that's not true. So has anybody proven an origin of life?
Yes.
Who?
The theists.
How did theists prove that there's a theistic origin of life? How did they prove? How did theists prove that there is that they know the origin of life? And what is it?
Because the naturalists haven't. They can't.
No, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir, but that is fallacious reasoning. I asked you, now hang on, I'm muting you again. I'm asking you specific questions to expose what you don't understand, because I don't think anybody's proven an origin of life. You think theists have proven an origin of life, and what I asked you was, what is that origin of life and how did they prove it? And if you say they proved it because naturalists haven't, then you are engaged in fallacious reasoning, because you don't prove that the butler did it by proving that the maid didn't, or even suspecting that the maid didn't. So what is the origin of life and how is it proven?
You haven't proven that unthinking, a mindless process.
Goodbye.
Sorted out.
Sorry. Goodbye. I gave you every opportunity. I asked you a specific question. I'm not a coward, sir. You're an idiot. I asked you a specific question, and the question was, what is the origin of life and how did they prove it? And your response is that you can't prove I'm wrong. Well, I'm sorry that you don't understand fallacies, but calling me a coward doesn't change the fact that you should have called in with your A game and some understanding of the subject that you're talking about, and you didn't. And I took every opportunity to make the questions as simple as possible for you so that you would not go down the road that you're doing. I'm going to unmute you one last time. How did they prove that the explanation is not naturalistic?
And don't respond with, your TV doesn't work, therefore my TV does turn on, because that's the argument that you keep going to.
No, it isn't.
It's exactly what you're doing.
Okay, goodbye.
No. Okay.
No, goodbye. You can sit there and think I'm a coward all day long, but we're explaining logical fallacies to you, and we are absolutely, unequivocally right. And any Christian that understands logical fallacies would call in and say the exact same thing, that because naturalism has not offered a conclusive demonstration of the origin of life, that does not mean the explanation is supernatural. It doesn't. You don't have, there's no way for you to demonstrate that naturalists won't have an explanation at some time in the future. You might as well just say, we think God did it, and you can't disprove that. Well, congratulations, that's an unfalsifiable proposition. Yeah, well, you can't prove that it happened by natural means. And the answer to that is yet. Meanwhile, we have plenty of good ideas, which is what Mike was talking about. We have plenty of potential explanations and models that could demonstrate an origin to life. And we know that the building blocks of life exist elsewhere in the universe, and that they can, under the right conditions, result in life.
Yeah,
I mean, that much is demonstrated. What we
my
don't know is how
main
exactly
point,
it happened in our case.
Yeah, and my main point is that, look, in one case, something's actually generating some predictions, and we're not kicking rocks in some lot, right? We're in that lot and we're building a frame potentially, right? We're actually trying to see. But in the case that you're offering, you're just saying like, yeah, your TV doesn't work, therefore mine turns on and has this cable package, and it's fully functional. But it just clearly doesn't follow from the fact that like mine doesn't turn on that yours therefore does. It's a really weird argument to make, and to not notice that that's just extremely fallacious.
So we've had lots of questions about God and evidence and everything else. We've got David in Texas, pronouns are he, him, who says God is real. There's plenty of evidence. The natural world speaks of God, experiences in church, reading the Bible. I don't see how reading the Bible is proof of God. I don't see how experiences in church, unless there's something identifiable and detectable and testable, is a proof of God. And I don't see the natural world speaking of God. So I'm ready for David to come in here and present some evidence. So welcome, David.
How's it going? How you doing?
Good.
I'm all right. I hope that we're not going down another path full of fallacies.
Yeah, I understand the concern. I guess what I would want to ask is, when you say evidence, would you say that do you kind of bias strictly empirical evidence?
I have a preference for empirical evidence over, let's say, anecdotal evidence and testimonial evidence, because anecdotal and testimonial evidence are only good enough at expanding about things that we already know. They're not good for demonstrating the truth of something for which we have no empirical evidence.
Do you have a position on the problem of the criterion?
No.
Like, are you familiar with the Chisholm problem of the criterion?
Not off the top of my head, but I mean, it's something I've definitely heard about, but so that's why I'm not going to state a position on it.
It's just the idea, he like poses two horns, kind of, whether like we start with what we know, and then we have to ask the question, how do we know? And it seems like you kind of have to have an answer to one of the questions before you can answer the other question. It's kind of like it's used a lot in discussion about epistemology, right? So I wonder if you take more of like a particularist route, which is one of the solutions, or like a Methodist route, being like starting with something that you just kind of know, maybe non-inferentially, or you try to figure out your method first.
So my epistemology, the closest, I tend to avoid labels because none of them sum it up perfectly, but foundherentism, the combination of foundationalism and coherentism, is closest to what my position is. But here's what we're talking about. You would need to say, like, define what God you're talking about, what are the properties of this God, and then talk about how we could demonstrate that God is real, because you believe in a God right now, and you believe that the natural world speaks to God, points to God, has evidence for God, whatever it is. So all you really need to do is define the God that you're talking about, and then tell us why you believe that God. That's it. What do you believe and why? And then we can talk about why we do or don't agree. So which God?
Right. And I am a Christian. I am a Christian. So, and I think that what's interesting is what I consider to be good evidence or a good argument is going to be germane to me in some sense. And I think that what you consider to be a good argument or good evidence will be, relative to you in some sense. And this is why our theory of knowledge.
No. So first of all, there's a lot of different versions of Christianity. So we would need you to be a little bit more explicit about which version of the Christian God you actually believe in. But my foundation is that there is just truth. There's no such thing as personal truth, subjective truth. There is, I'm not denying your personal experience. You experience whatever you experience, but
sure,
to you, it's experience, and to everybody else, it's just hearsay. It's just anecdotal. And so if you say, I believe in the Christian God, and my reasons wouldn't satisfy you, Matt, then they shouldn't satisfy you, because my epistemology is rooted in what should satisfy any reasonable person who cares and values truth. That's my reasoning. And so when somebody tells me, like, for example, I'm giving you the full benefit of the doubt, David, if you said, I can't prove it to you, Matt, but God revealed himself to me and gave me information and did a powerful work in my life, and that's why I believe. That's fine. I can't prove that you're mistaken because I don't have that experience. But what I can say is that every time somebody's come up with an example like that, where some subjective experience has convinced them as a God, every single time I'm able to identify a fallacious line of reasoning there, or at a minimum, it isn't enough to warrant belief for anybody. I want beliefs that are rationally warranted for everybody when we all have access to the same information. Because if you're going to argue that you believe due to information that I don't have access to, that doesn't do me any good, right? So what information do we all have access to that you think warrants believing in a God?
Right. And I'm sorry if I don't mean to be evasive here. I'm kind of trying to make a meta point about what the evidence that I personally find convincing, why it's convincing for me, and then kind of speak to you about the things that you would find convincing for you, because you were talking about fallacies. And I think that it's really interesting that our foundations for epistemology are all fallacious. Like you mentioned, found herentism.
They're not
I'm
fallacious.
sure that you're familiar with so like, you know, the Munchausen trilemma, right?
So the fact that we have to make presuppositions, the fact that there are some presuppositions doesn't mean that presuppositions aren't a fallacy. The fact that something isn't warranted doesn't make it fallacious. Fallacies relate to arguments that are invalid in structure or unsound. But anyway,
right, but all the foundations for epistemology rest on some fallacious things. Such
I'm not going. I want
to or infinite.
David, this part is a complete waste of time. We're not going to solve competing epistemology here right now. Why can't you just tell me what God you believe in and why, so we can actually discuss that? If it turns out that we have dramatically different epistemologies, I'm sure we'll get to that. If it turns out that you have a rationally justified belief that is based on evidence that we all have access to, I'm confident we'll get to that too.
Yeah, and I'm not confident that the problems that you raise don't surface in your own epistemology, that of your own concerns. So you might as well just see what it is that you believe in, why.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you believe in, why?
For me,
because I might answer it different than Matt.
Right?
I might talk about something else, or just some other methodology. So you give us yours.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of an abductive case. I'm trying to just make like an inference to the best explanation.
You're not going to convince me that a God exists ever through abductive reasoning. Yeah, because God can't be the best explanation for anything. We explain things in terms of other things we understand. Trying to make an abductive argument for God is an attempt to explain that something by something for which you don't have an understanding of. Yeah. You have no access to a God. You don't know what a God's like. It is an explanation for nothing. It is a panacea.
In fact, if you take an abductive method, it's the thing that you're trying to prove lies outside the scope you're using, because the scope that you're using in an abductive method is what is most likely probable, right? And you're invoking something we have no evidence for. So by default, it's not more likely probable. You're saying, like, if we put it in a syllogism or something, you'd be like, well, I wouldn't go into a syllogism, but if we just went like analytically what it means for an abductive method being most probable or most likely, and you invoke something that, like, analytically is not most probable, or at least doesn't have any inductive evidence or any evidence that we could look at right now, then just by default, the scope you're using with the ontology you're trying to prove lies outside that scope. I mean, you would have to recognize that, right?
Yeah, in an abductive argument, what you would end up doing is listing all of the known possible causes and then determining which of those is most likely. But you don't get to presume that God exists as a probable or possible cause. That needs to be demonstrated before you can even make the abductive argument.
Yeah, because it's like treating the abductive argument deductively. And I'm just saying you would be treating the abductive argument like deductively, like you've exhausted everything, therefore you could make some type of like deductive conclusion or something, and that seems to be fallacious, right?
But I want him to get I'm going to get time, so we can start the clock since we haven't used it today, so that'd be fun. So yeah, David, there was a lot there. Please address it in however you want.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I do think a lot of that is fair. And I also would say that there are certain arguments, like maybe like the modal ontological argument or some other arguments that are also convincing, that are part of my cumulative case. And I understand what you're speaking about. I'm not necessarily like straight using Bayesian reasoning. I'm not necessarily trying to take induction and use it as deduction. There's a lot of things that contribute to what I think is a good case. Now, obviously, you've heard many of the arguments for theism and you reject them. And earlier you had said that presuppositions aren't fallacious. Well, there's plenty of people that just presuppose God, right? And I'm sure you don't accept that either. So I'm just trying to say that there's something that is particular to your presuppositions and your theory of knowledge that make you reject certain things. And it's not so much what is the best argument or the perfect evidence. It's much more about like where we come to these things and what biases and the presuppositions we bring. And I just think that if all our knowledge is based on fallacies to begin with, like on kind of on an atheist worldview, I think looking at the modal conditions for knowledge are perhaps more interesting.
Okay. I guess we're done then, because I gave you a full minute to explain why you believe something. And instead of offering us even the slightest beginnings of a speck of a hint of why you believe something, instead you talked about there's some presupposition that I have that's making me reject it, and what biases and presuppositions I have, and atheist thinking is all based on fallacies. So I guess we're just going to move on, since we gave you the opportunity to demonstrate why you believe and why you think other people should, and all you did was continue down your philosophical ragging on what you assert is fallacious atheist epistemology and bias. So thanks for nothing.
Yeah, David, you calling in just to say, like, when you utter like this is what you presuppose, you've kind of already messed up, because like me or Matt have nothing to do with why you believe, right? At all. So I don't know like what that adds to the evidence.
Here we go. We're going to try this again. We have Tom in England, pronouns are he, him, who has an argument that 100% disproves God. So we've got an atheist here who thinks they can 100% disprove God. And so, Tom, my first question is, which God?
It would disprove all gods if correct. I'm very nervous about it, though.
All gods. All gods don't even have the same characteristics. So what are the characteristics of all gods that you're going to debunk?
Well, this is interesting. You've taken it down the street. A theist god and a deist god. Any theist god, any deist god.
A theist god and a deist god are two completely different propositions. Theist gods interact with reality, and deist gods don't. So how are you going to disprove two sets of gods with different characteristics? This is why I asked why first, or to define it first.
Okay, sure. What I'm trying to do is prove the properties of all powerful, all knowledgeable, and free will at the same time. Being that at the same time.
Aha. That's not all gods. That's not all gods. There's no contradiction in someone
So basically, what you're saying is, for any God that is purported to be all powerful, all knowledgeable, it is incompatible with free will. Well, that's not true unless it also created this world and has options. Because if in fact there was a God that was all powerful and all knowledgeable, but it did not create this universe, or it did not create this universe with options, knowing what would happen in the future, then free will isn't relevant to that God.
Okay, so can we take away the property of, say, just all knowledgeable and all powerful, and call that God?
Okay, how do you prove that there is no being? Now, by all powerful, normally among theologians, when they describe all powerful and all knowledgeable, or omnipotent and omniscient, they are not suggesting that God could create a burrito so hot that he couldn't eat it, or that God knows the unknowable. What they're saying is that God is maximally powerful and maximally knowledgeable, and they don't know what the limits of that are. Does your argument address that?
It just is a God that can do anything which is possible and can know anything which is possible. If that's what you mean by maximally powerful and maximally knowledgeable.
Yes. That can do anything that is possible, that is logically possible, can know anything that's logically possible. Cool. Just prove that God.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm very nervous about it. So, okay. So something which is all-knowing always knew it would create, say, a unique human called Adam A, because it can tell the future for all eternity. 2. However, that's all-knowing something. Yes. 2. However, that all-knowing something is...
You've already lost at the very first. Really?
Since you didn't say that, okay.
So you're saying that a God that was all-knowing knew that it would create Adam A, essentially, is your first premise?
Yes.
Okay. How did you demonstrate that that was a knowable premise or knowable fact? Because a God that is all-knowing knows everything that is knowable, but you haven't demonstrated that knowing the future is knowable.
All right. So yeah, no. I thought if he was knew everything which is possible, and he's all-knowing, that he would be able to tell the future for all eternity.
You don't know that.
Saying that. Right. Right. So yeah. Okay. Okay. So you're saying the argument's wrong then because of this. I don't know that it can tell the future for all eternity. But then there's lots of things it couldn't do. I mean, yeah, go on.
No. That doesn't mean you, just because you don't know whether or not it can do that, doesn't mean it can't. And from that, you cannot then conclude there's lots of things that it can't do. You don't know what it can't do. This is the problem.
But if we define it as something that can tell the future for all eternity, because it's all knowing, because then it wouldn't be all knowing, would it, if it couldn't tell the future?
It would be if we define all knowing as knowing everything that is knowable and the future isn't knowable. If it knows everything that's knowable and the future is unknowable, then not knowing the future isn't a defeater.
Okay, so this particular God wouldn't know the future, is what you're saying. If we run with that.
No, I did not say this particular God wouldn't know the future.
Right.
I said you have no way of demonstrating that a God that knows everything that's knowable would know everything about the future. No offense, Tom, but the fact that I've explained that same point 2 or 3 times, and it is a basic logical construction. Yeah, we don't need to keep going, because I'm not saying what is or isn't knowable. I'm saying, how do you demonstrate that absolute knowledge of the future is in fact in the set of things that is knowable?
Yeah, because
I don't know.
Open theists would disagree with you, right? I'm pretty sure their position.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not like super familiar. I don't talk to a lot of open theists, but they're going to claim that, right, he's omniscient, but the future is going to be open, right? I don't know if they make the claim that he necessarily knows the future, but there can be some conception where somebody defines omniscience where they know all true current propositions or something like that. Because all your argument seems like predicate on like analytic notions of what you mean, but like presumably someone could just mean something else by the term. That's fine. If you're rendering an argument with this in mind, it would just be the fact that you've left out one other type of God that we could still conceive of, that you would have to render a separate argument for. So even if your argument was successful, right, it's valid and the conclusion follows and the premises are sound, it seems like the thing that Matt's pointing out, you would have to give a separate argument for, because that would be one type of a God, right? And you're saying that your argument kind of takes them all out with one fail swoop, like you're.
Yes. I was attempting to do that. Yes. As I say, you seem to think it's certain that I've failed to do that.
I really wish we could do that, Tom.
I'm very disappointed. Yeah, I'm very disappointed. But okay, so it doesn't. It can't. Basically, what we're saying is that it can't tell the future.
No.
You could define it as it not being able to tell the future.
Wow. Go back and listen to the call again. Go back and listen to the call again if you need to. All I'm saying is, if you say a God who is all-knowing knows everything that is knowable, you need to stop right there and define what is the set of knowable things. And does knowing the future and having perfect knowledge of the future, is that a knowable thing? I don't know.
All right. But I just don't see what. Okay, so I'm just misunderstanding. I just don't see why, if it can know everything which is possible, why it couldn't tell the future if it were a God. But I'm not guessing it. Your point. Sorry about that.
Because maybe it's a God that allows us to have choices that it doesn't know about. Maybe there is enough quantum indeterminacy to make the future not perfectly predictable. whatever the case is, and I don't know, there, you know, if you're going to say there's a being that knows all of the knowable things, that doesn't do any good because you're not that being. So you don't know what the set of knowable things is. The only thing that you know is knowable are the things that you can identify are in fact knowable.
Right. But can I get around that by saying, even if we just assume for the sake of discussion, because then I'd be assuming, wouldn't I? Right. Yeah, I can't see any way around that, actually. I think you're right, Matt. I don't want to say so certain that you're right, but it just didn't occur to me that could be.
Yep.
That could be a possibility.
Hop right back to the drawing board, and because we'd love it. I think Mike and I would both love it if we could disprove all gods with one little argument. It would make me feel like I've wasted the last 18 years of my life. But
and let me put it this way, Tom. I've tried to construct arguments because I love philosophy and stuff, so I like thinking about some of these concepts and then presenting them to friends. There's arguments that I think are successful, but they're only arguments that rule out certain types of gods. I'd have to keep formulating other types of God or arguments, and it doesn't take even a giant chunk of them out, right? I mean, because I don't know what stops somebody from just defining God a different way or removing the properties at which my argument, hinges on. So, and when Matt first had said that, it seemed like before we even got to the all-knowing thing, seemed like you kind of funneled this God into a more like specific criterion when it's supposed to be like wide open, right? Which is the whole force of the conclusion. Yeah.
I got to move on. I got one more call I want to get to, Tom, but go back to the drawing board, and I hope you do.
Huge fan, Matt. Thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you. I hope you do find the one argument to end them all. But
in the show,
that's difficult when there's different criteria, because there are people who believe that there's a God that is powerful enough and knowledgeable enough, but not necessarily omni. And so you can't, that wouldn't fit in there. It's like saying, it's almost like suggesting that there's only one fallacy and every argument commits that same fallacy. Yeah. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
We'd have to do a little bit more with that. Final call for today from California. Seth, pronouns are he, him. And Seth wants to explain to us that if Christianity is true, there's real negative consequences. And I think I agree with Seth. So welcome, Seth. How are you?
Hey, man, this is crazy. I've watched you for years, and I've even been on your Twitch last week. I'm the one that is on paternity leave. That I mistakenly said maternity, but I'm on maternity leave. Paternity leave.
Yeah. When you said this is crazy, I thought you were going to ask for my number. Hey, I just met you.
So I'm happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
And so I've been, like I said, I watched you for years. I have a position. I have a couple questions at the end if we're able to get through them. Just one I'm curious about. I don't really need to respond to them. I just want to ask them, see what your thoughts are. So my position, I just kind of say it clearly. I'll try to be really specific. I know how conversation get quickly out of whack. So I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me here. So my position, is that if what Jesus says is true, it actually matters how we live. So basically, just a way to explain this further is, let's say a debate is over between a Christian and atheist, right? Everyone goes home for the day. Now, what I'm kind of talking about is any other debate, that goes on. Everyone could go home, sure, it'd be a nice thing to think about. My argument is, if what Jesus says is true, then it actually matters. So, for example, all the audience that goes home, some of them are going home, maybe some of them are going to watch porn. Maybe some of them are going home, they're going to be abusive. Maybe some of them are going home, they're going to have road rage on the way. Maybe some of them, so on and so forth. Maybe they're going to go gamble. So my position is this pertains to one of the most important fundamental aspects of life, and it is so important that it actually matters how you live your life. And if what Jesus says is true, like my position stated, it is actually wrong to do those things. And on an atheistic worldview, of course, it's different. Everyone has different opinions. But as Christians, we all have the same opinion. And so from those different opinions, some might see
that's not
fine, or porn is fine. Or yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, it's not true that Christians all have the same opinion. There's over 1,000 denominations, and they disagree on including what the nature of Jesus is or was, is disagreed on by Christians. And when you listed all the things about what people were going to go do, you listed watch porn and gamble, two things I'm fond of, with road rage and abuse, two things I don't like at all. I would agree with you that if Christianity is true, what we do matters. But I think what we do matters even if Christianity isn't true.
Right, and what you said earlier about all Christians, you're correct on that. What I meant was we should all have a source, which is the biblical worldview and the Gospels and what Jesus says. The
problem is that the biblical worldview. The problem is that the biblical worldview is grossly immoral, and I would think that you would probably agree with that. Like, do you think that slavery is morally permissible?
I figured that would come up. I definitely want to go. We can definitely go there. I don't want to confuse you on my position. I don't want to. I'm already kind of messing up here. I feel it. So I'm sorry. But let me just quickly go back to a specific topic just so we can stay on the position. I can definitely go that route as well.
Well, we're running out of time. So yeah, you do it however you want.
Yeah, sure. So really quick. So porn, for example. Okay, I used to be involved in porn. My wife is aware of it, and so let me just take that one example. So let's say you said, you're fond of it. A lot of people agree that it's fine. A lot of people do it at relationships, so on and so forth. So if I could prove, right, that it is destructive in a number of different ways, and how men see women, would that then change your mind on it?
You would have to prove that it's destructive in how I see women. Although I guess you'd have to presume that I'm watching porn with women in it. That seems to be presumptive, but I do happen to watch porn with women in it. But if you could demonstrate that it's giving me that it is a destructive perception that I have about women is because of porn, yeah.
Okay, right. So I can definitely I could go into the details if you'd like me to, but what my main point was that as you go down the list.
Seth,
yeah, go ahead.
What bad view of women do I currently have?
Right. So with porn, I would say that it objectifies your view of women.
No, I said, what bad view of women do I, Matt, currently have?
That I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know.
Do me next too.
Yeah,
I'm assuming.
So the thing that we agreed here was that if you could demonstrate that porn has given me a distorted view of women, a bad view of women, that then I would agree that it was harmful and I would quit. But you don't know and can't list any bad view of women that I have. So how could you possibly tie something that you can't demonstrate to porn?
Understood. What if I said, taking a poll?
It's so weird.
Relate porn to.
It's so weird because we're way over time, but when I ask a question and then you just, okay, it's like that question showed that your line of reasoning was fallacious, and then you just, okay, and move on to the next thing. It's really frustrating because at the end of the day, even if it turned out that porn was in fact harmful, that has nothing to do with whether or not Jesus is God. And it also could be the case that even if gambling is destructive and road rage, even if everything that the Bible pronounces as a negative is in fact negative, that doesn't tell you anything about whether it's pronounced as negative because there's a God. Meanwhile, the same book allows for slavery, holds men in a higher status than women with regard to property rights. They are not equal. With regard to slavery, they are not equal. There's no equality in there at all. Christ is the head of the church, and men are the head of the household, and women are to be silent, and they don't have the same rights. And so if you want to make a case that perhaps porn has distorted my view of women, I would say that the Bible has distorted your view of women and reality.
Understood. I can definitely see how you would think that, and I understand that perspective. And
so how do you demonstrate that God?
I'm going to be honest. I'm not a Bible scholar, so when I do look at those difficult verses, I do say, there's a part of it that's a point for atheism, right? Because I don't want to be radical, right? I don't want to be radical and say, oh, as a Christian, I'm just going to ignore all the tough verses in the Bible, and I'm going to say, oh, I'll strictly go with the Bible. I'm seeking myself. I'm seeking for truth, just like you are, and I absolutely look into those type of verses, and I see.
So hold on, Seth. I'm confused.
So what did you find then?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm just confused because this concern about utility and like things like that is just irrelevant to whether or not the claim is true, which is like, so I guess I just have a disconnect. I don't really give a fuck all if like the Bible is accurate on some notions of like utility or maybe it has some things that like they could be right on from like a moral perspective in one case. Like Matt said, you're just that's juxtaposed.
It's like murder's wrong whether the Bible said so or not.
Yeah, and then we can just point out to like where it's condoned or where like Amalekites are supposed to be slaughtered or where it's okay in Mosaic law.
Whether you can keep the virgin girls for yourself, whether you need to turn them over to the church.
Yeah, so if we're going to play
this all day long.
Yeah, if we're going to play that game,
so
it's going to flip upside down. It's not going to be good. So it'd be a better case just to present why the claims are actually true, as opposed to invoke something that's going to make it worse.
While I agree, Seth, that what we do matters. It matters whether or not Jesus is real or God is real. But we're 17 minutes past when we're supposed to end. And rather than keep going down this one, why don't you just call back on another Sunday and we'll just start with, here's why you think God is real, because that's the part that matters. I don't give a shit what God thinks about my sex life, whether he's real or not real. But if he's real, at least then we would have something to discuss.
Understood. And we can definitely talk. And like you said, you're over time. I appreciate you having me for this long. I can definitely call in another time. And that argument for what the evidence is for God, I would love to discuss that more. And my whole position here was just mainly for.
I'll put you on first.
Saying if these things all line up, then something is going on here. All these things line up. And even though
they don't all line up. Call me back and explain what lines up, and I'll tell you why they don't line up and why you're absolutely wrong about it. But if you call back on this number, I'll put you on first if I'm on.
Yeah, I don't know that they line up if we've moved away from a lot of those things that are going to be constitutive of your religion, like slavery and slaughtering of Amalekite kids and stuff. So,
yeah, it's bizarre. I just did a video on Lot and his daughters in Sodom and Gomorrah, and the fact that the same story is kind of retold in a slightly different way. Whereas Lot offers up his 2 virgin daughters to the crowd so that they won't have sex with the angels who are staying with him. And then they refuse, so the angels blind them all. In another story, a man and his concubine are staying with a man and his daughter, and he offers up his daughter and the concubine, but the concubine ends up having to go out there and being sexually assaulted the entire night until she's just collapsed unconscious on the doorstep. And then her partner comes out after sleeping. I don't know how you can sleep. Says, "Get up, we got to go." She doesn't get up, so he throws her on the donkey, takes her home, and cuts her into 12 pieces and passes those 12 pieces out to the tribes of Israel, the corners or boundaries of Israel, which means tribes in this context. Yeah. In any case, before anybody comes to me making presumptions about what porn I like, there's a lot of different porn I like, and what it's doing to my brain, you better at least know what my position is on things. And as long as I'm the one that's fighting for equality, as long as I'm the one that's standing up for individual freedom and individual sovereignty, I don't think that you and your Bible have fuck all to lecture me about. But you never know. On that note, thank you to our crew and to the moderators and all the people in chat and everybody who contributed, either financially or through watching and spreading the word. Let's get more calls. We had good calls today. We had a fun time. Thank you so much, Jmike, for doing this. We will see you all next week. Don't forget about all the other shows coming up this week, including Secular Sexuality on Thursday, Truth Wanted on Friday, Talk Heathen on Sunday morning, and the flagship nonprofits there at 3. So see you next time. Bye-bye.
What will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the bullshit everyone around you buys? You think it's setting up your business, what goes on between my thighs? I wonder when we'll be rid of your lies.
It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.